V'osa B'Tzalel v'Oliov v'chol ish chacham leiv. B'Tzalel's assistant was Oliov from the tribe of Dan. So B'Tzalel, Oliov, v'chol ish chacham leiv. Asher nosan Hashem chochmu sfuna behemo. The chacham leiv which Hashem had given chochma and tfuna behemo regarding their responsibilities. Lo das lasos, to know how to do. It's called meleches avodas kodesh. L'chol asher tziva Hashem, for all that God had commanded them. The Ramban and the earlier parshas had explained, these people, what was their background? The background was mortar and brick. And now, all of a sudden, they're involved in the most sophisticated workmanship, the most delicate work, whether it's gold, silver, weaving, dyeing, carpentry, whatever it may be. So how were they able to bring this all about? Chol ish chacham leiv. Every man who was chacham leiv means, as we explained, who had Yiras Shamayim, because as David says, Reishis Chochma Yiras Hashem, he possessed Chochmas Halev, wisdom of the heart. That person, God gave into his heart Chochma Sfuna, knowledge and understanding, Behemo, regarding all these responsibilities. Lodas, lasos is called meleches avodas kodesh, to know how to do all the creative activity that was necessary for the service of Kodesh, for all that Hashem had commanded them. So it was a miracle. The Chofetz Chaim points this out somewhere, that you could read every book on whatever area of whatever area of vocation, whichever it may be, how to be a goldsmith. You can read every book on it, unless a person's apprenticed by a master, and with experience, only through actually applying that skill or that knowledge in actuality, in real time, you get better with time. In regard, the miracle here was that it's not only God put the wisdom and the understanding in their hearts, but he put in the hearts lodas lasos. It's not only knowing, it's lasos to actualize, that knowledge to actually actualize, to be able to perform whatever was needed to perform, all that Hashem had commanded them. As they say, with experience you only get better. It's not because you understand intellectually the subject matter to a greater degree, but rather through your actualizing what you understand, you become more adept in that area of what you understood. Here, although they had no background experience, it's as if they were mentored by the greatest masters, and they were able to bring about this exact product or result which was intended by Hashem. But over here, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh brings out something interesting. As I mentioned in the past, normally if you have various geniuses in whatever area field it may be, in craftsmanship, each person's genius shows and manifests itself in what that person creates. In regard to the Mishkan, there was a uniformity where everybody, it's as if it was all done by one craftsman. All the goldsmithing was exact. The carpentry was exact. Everything blended and melded as if there was one craftsman who created everything. There was no indication that anyone had done it differently. Why? Because again, that was part of the miracle. And not only that, B'Tzalel had overseen and had instructed him how to exactly fine-tune it to the point it should be that level of sophistication as if it was done by one craftsman. We had mentioned early in the parsha, there were two levels of Jews who had participated in the building of the Mishkan. There was Asher Neso Libo, and there was Asher Nodvo Rucho. If you remember, we discussed the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, a very profound word. Neso Libo means the person who was involved due to he was inspired by his heart. And the other person is classified a person, Asher Nodvo Rucho, he gave due to the generosity of his spirit. So we explained what's the difference between the person who had participated, who was Neso Libo, the one who was inspired by his heart. He says a person who does something as a result of inspiration, that means you're touched by the objective and by what's needed, and therefore that's what drew you to participate. Nadvu Rucho means a person who has generosity of spirit. A person is generous. A generous person, how much does he give? He gives based on the degree of his generosity. Some people more generous, some people less generous. But it's the person who's actually giving and parting with what he has due to the degree of his generosity. Neso Libo means the person is inspired by his heart, meaning you're inspired due to the objective. It's not me being generous, but rather it's the objective that has to be addressed. Neso Libo means a person, all he focuses on is the objective has to be addressed. And therefore, you could have even a person of medium income who gives like a wealthy man. And you have a person who is of generous spirit, although he may be wealthy, he doesn't give according to his wealth, meaning based on his capacity, because the moment he feels that giving more will infringe on what he needs, he stops at that point. He doesn't give beyond that point. We find by Neso Libo, the Torah identifies that person as Ish Asher Neso Libo. Ish is a sign of distinction. A person is a person of status. Ish Asher Neso Libo. When it speaks about Nodva Rucho, the one who gave due to the generosity of spirit, the word Ish is omitted. It doesn't say Ish. Because first, the Torah acknowledges the person on the more advanced level, the one who was inspired. The other end, it speaks about the person who was generous. Over here in the pasuk, we see something interesting. Vayikra Moshe el Betzal vel Lov vel Kol Ish Chacham Lev. Moshe had called Betzal and Lov and all those who had wisdom of the heart. Asher Nosan Hashem Chochma B'Libo, who Hashem had put wisdom in their hearts. Kol Asher Neso Libo LeKorvel Amlocha Lasos Oso. He had called the one who was inspired by his heart to be dedicated to the creative work to do it. Over here, there's no mention of Nadvu Rucho. It says he only summoned Asher Neso Libo, the person who was inspired by his heart. I mean, evidently, the others, they came, because they had also brought their whatever they had given. But in terms of the acknowledgement, Moshe summoning them, calling them, he called those who are at that more advanced level, who are Asher Neso Libo. I'd mentioned the Rambam in the Laws of Talmud Torah, when he speaks about if one wants to acquire the crown of Torah, what does he have to do? And the person has to be dedicated at an exceptional level. And he quotes many of the things which are stated in Pirkei Avos, that to acquire the crown of Torah, you have to assume a certain level of lifestyle. What is the lifestyle? That you have to win yourself from physicality. You can't occupy yourself indulging or being involved in eating and drinking and actually whittle away your time. Everything has to be invested in Torah itself. You esteem the Torah to such a degree that you invest yourself fully in the pursuit of the Torah knowledge. And what is it? As the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, Pas melach tochal, bread and salt you shall eat, mayim b'sura tishter, you should eat water only in small measures, al oretz tishon, on the ground you shall sleep, chai tzar tichter. And a life of deprivation you should live, meaning even if you have to live a life of deprivation, that will not stop you from study of Torah. That's the level of dedication a person has to have to be able to acquire the crown of Torah. Those are the words of Rambam. But the Rambam predicates it on Mi asher neso libo liknos kesed Torah. One who's inspired by his heart to acquire the crown of Torah. The Ram doesn't write Misha wrote to liknos kesed Torah. One who wants to acquire the crown of Torah. Rambam predicates it on Mi asher neso libo, the person who's inspired by his heart to acquire the crown of Torah. So meaning, a person says, I want to acquire the crown of Torah. What exactly is the prescription? And he follows the prescription, Pirkei Avos. Bread and salt you shall eat, small measures of water you should drink, on the ground you should sleep, a life of deprivation, you should live. It's not going to work. The only person who's able to go on this continuum, live that life of not being involved in the amenities, that's only the person who's inspired by his heart. When you're inspired with the objective. Meaning, I want to be the one who's going to possess Torah. That's what you want. When you're that committed, you committed, all the focus is the acquisition of Torah, then everything else is an incidental in life. The eating, the drinking, where you sleep, and what you have to endure to be able to achieve that. But if you're not inspired by your heart, it's something I want to do. I means it's me, and there's the Torah. The moment the person becomes part of the equation, the question is, how much am I willing to give up? It's like the person who gives due to the spirit of his generosity. He has a generous spirit. Generosity goes to a certain point, because the motivating factor, the source of the giving, is not the objective, but it's the generosity of the person himself, because he's generous. So once it reaches a point where he feels it's going to be an infringement on his needs, because he's gone beyond a certain point, that's when he stops. The person who's inspired by his heart, all he thinks about is, we have to achieve that. Once we have to achieve that, that's at all costs, because the person doesn't think about himself. So Moshe, ultimately, when everything was completed, who did he acknowledge? Who did he summon? Betzalel and Oliov, and those who were inspired by their hearts.